Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark. We stand together and accept that we now live in a world transformed by Fukushima. From 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time here on UCY.TV radio. We relentlessly engage every ear that listens. We expose and confront the complete lack of accountability for the nuclear industry. Consider social engineering programs who view our bodies, minds, and souls as assets on a balance sheet. We discuss vital current issues, interview activists, and engage our audience in an effort to allow all voices to be heard. The Age of Vision radio show creates a venue that all will choose. We encourage our listeners to reclaim their power and their courage to take action and save our planet from the ravages of greed and indifference. Our actions matter. Every voice matters. We remind our listeners that happiness is resistance. Love is greater than fear. Good morning, UCY.TV radio listeners. This is Lonnie Clark with the Age of Fission radio show. Today is May 28th, 2018. It's 8 o'clock in the morning here on the West Coast, and oh my goodness, we have spring. Spring has sprung. It is beautiful and blue outside. I hope that you're experiencing the same near you. I know that our brothers and sisters on the East Coast are bracing for some terrible storms. So I hope everyone is able to keep themselves safe and their families safe. Today is Memorial Day. I do not have a guest. I have intentionally kept my time slot empty a little bit because in the last few months I had so many guests on, I hardly ever had any time to really talk about the issues and the things that mattered that I wanted to discuss on my own personal opinion, I guess. So I left a few slots open, and today was one of them. It's Memorial Day, and I was thinking a lot about the atomic veterans, getting the word out to the atomic veterans. This is the sad part, is they are there was a story written, this was very interesting. Check out the date when it was written. People moved on in their lives after Fukushima, November 8th, 2011, right? It said that the hunt is on for an estimated 195,000 veterans exposed to radiation when the United States conducted atmospheric nuclear bomb testing between 1945 and 62. This is a sad story. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But if these veterans have any one of the 21 traceable cancers traceable to radiation exposure, and I'm going to open that link up, the men or their widows or children are entitled to a one-time award of up to $75,000 from the Justice Department, or a monthly disability payment of $26.73 from the Department of Veteran Affairs. Finding these veterans is a tough challenge for Ritter, who's trying to get the word out. The average age is 84, and the Defense Department estimates they are dying at a rate of 16,000 a year. Yeah, so they just basically bought their time. Many are unaware of the benefits. No money for advertising. 557,000 atomic veterans were exposed to lethal radiation. 500,000 people. The Navy thought it was okay to expose 500,000 of their own soldiers to atomic testing. Think of that, people. On today, when we're thinking about Memorial Day and we honor our veterans and we love our veterans, 500,000, more than 500,000 were exposed to lethal radiation as lab rats. Now, think of this, extrapolate this out to other sciences, other chemicals, other drugs. Like, when you join the United States Army, you basically become a lab rat for Mengele. Because, let's be clear, folks, we did have a coup after World War II. The Nazis moved into our government. I mean, for real. And I know, last week I went to a fundraiser for KEPW, and thank you, KEPW, for carrying this station, and welcome all of the Eugene, Oregon fans that are listening to us late at night. I was at the fundraiser last week at Soraya's, and I was sitting at the table with Jeff Cohen, one of the producers of All Democracies Lie, which is an excellent documentary that came to town that I saw. It was a one-time event. And the room was packed, sold out. But we were at dinner, and I said, I made a passing comment that I think that Trump is literally Pinochet 2.0. I think he was installed by the powers that run the CIA. And when Trump says there is a deep state, he's part of the deep state. Because his first building was a CIA cover. It was a paint company, and he bought it right after the crash in the late 80s. How did that happen? Oh, I'm so magically intelligent. As he bumbles his way to the frickin' top. Literally screws his way to the top. Screws over everyone and everything in his way. We have a dangerous president, people. And I'm going to talk about this on Memorial Day because if you forget your rights, you will lose them. We are in a seriously dangerous time. We need every citizen who listens to my voice to be calling their elected representatives, state, local. I've been calling my federal, but I think I'm going to start calling my locals and telling them that I am freaked out by the state of our nation. On Memorial Day, where we're supposed to value our veterans and value the service they give to our country, we are ignoring a man in the White House who has broken the emoluments clause from day one, who refuses to show us his tax returns, whose campaign is actually under valid investigation because they were tipped off by a foreign government who told us that they saw that there was some interference. And we now find out that the president's campaign not only met with Russia, they met with Saudi Arabia. I wonder who else. I can't wait for Mueller to come out with everything. And you know what's going to happen? We're not going to hear everything. It's all going to be super duper. It's so corrupt. This is the stain of the presidency of the United States. This is a constitutional crisis, and I'm going to call it right now on Memorial Day. Lonnie Clark, 8:08 a.m. in the morning on 5/28/2018. I have my glasses on. Can you tell? There you go. I'm thinking about these nuclear veterans, these old guys. They were so brave. They just stood there in the face of the blast and their skin got burned and they got sick. And they just did it, like our veterans on the USS Reagan, right? So sad that the United States government is fighting them to pay for their benefits, denying that they got exposed to radioactive contamination while cleaning up a nuclear meltdown in Fukushima. On Memorial Day, our government is still pursuing not making payments to men who were alive. At least this thing on the atomic war veterans, this article's from the AARP, written in what year? 2011. November 8th, 2011, by Judy Hansen, AARP veteran, getting the word out to atomic veterans exposed to radiation. Do you think they're doing that to the soldiers who stood in Fukushima and were willing to just like do whatever they had to do, what their government told them to do, to go help the Japanese people after a nuclear meltdown? And now we're denying they're getting sick. On Memorial Day, the government still has a federal file. You know what that requires? My rain stick. You need a bit of peace here, man. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. It is Memorial Day, so I am actually really grateful that we have a government of rules and laws, as so far as it appears. And yes, we need to improve it. And this fascist telling people they shouldn't be in the country because they don't want to stand for the flag. Up yours. He doesn't even know which hand to put on the flag, folks. Seriously. And anyone who believes this guy is real needs to see a psychiatrist. People need to go to see therapy if they think he's doing good for the economy. Really? Wait till October. Wait till it all comes bumbling, crumbling down. Because you know what Trump has done? Bankrupt. More than 3 times, folks. Every chance he gets bankrupted. You think he could care less about us? This is a constitutional crisis. And I'm talking about it on Memorial Day because these men, over 500,000 veterans, were exposed to nuclear contamination in testing after the war was done. Don't you think that's ironic? Don't you think that's interesting that the people who infiltrated our country were able to murder 500,000 and frankly murder a major part, really cause harm to the entire infrastructure of the United States and to the health of our country for hundreds of years by dragging in these nuclear monsters into our country, Operation Paperclip. Wow. Well, I'm going to give out our number. I don't know if anybody could call in, but if you want to call in, you can give it the all-American try. It's 718-717-8106. And I believe that you can get on, or you can call, this number might actually work better. 718-717, I guess you're not going to call that number because my brain just left it. 718-717, it'll come back to me. I honestly do not know it. That is hilarious. And that is my own personal Skype number. I haven't used it in that long. 718-717-82 something. Never mind. Let us move on, my dears. Let's get back to these atomic veterans. Hold on, let me do this. I am going to see if I can find my number because that kind of bugs me. This kind of stuff really does bug me. So let me see. I'm going to go into Skype. Hold on. Oh, my number is... hold on, Pecan. And I think 718-717... I don't know it, so I honestly don't know it. So that's that way. That's the way that goes. Sorry, guys. You can't call in, so I'm just going to keep talking to you, as I had planned originally. Veterans' long battle for nuclear test compensation. This was dated November 22nd, 2010. And then here's AARP writing this story November 8th, 2011. And this is a BBC story. This was in November. So then by the following November, we have this story in the AARP. Wow, almost a year later. The Court of Appeals decision to deny ex-servicemen compensation they say they suffered during the Cold War nuclear test more than 50 years ago is a setback for thousands who watched the testing cases anxiously. And this was in Britain, they denied them. This is a BBC story. So then here's the United States with their complete fake patriotism. Getting the word out to the atomic veterans exposed to radiation is difficult. It's actually difficult. This is just so unbelievable. One of the things that they say in this story, many unaware of the benefits. NAAV, founded in 1979 by atomic veteran Orville Kelly, to get compensation and recognition for these men and women who took an oath never to reveal what they were doing, not to their doctors, their families, or the public. This is where we effing went wrong, folks. This cloak of secrecy was lifted in 1996. 1996. They had a long, how many secrets, how many veterans? By then Defense Secretary William Perry. Many veterans still do not know they are free to speak, or do not realize they are entitled to compensation if they can prove their cancer diagnosis was triggered by radiation exposure. U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Oh my gosh. Presumptive diseases related to ionizing radiation. This was the link they had on that story. For veterans who participated in the radiation risk activity during service, including atomic veterans, VA assumes that certain cancers are related to their exposure. These are called presumptive diseases. Cancers of the bile duct, bone, brain, breast, colon, esophagus, gallbladder, liver, in quotes, primary site, but not if cirrhosis or hepatitis B is indicated. Lung, including bronchoalveolar cancer, pancreas, pharynx, ovary, salivary gland, small intestine, stomach, thyroid, urinary tract, kidney, renal, pelvis, urinary, black urethra, leukemia except chronic lymphomatic leukemia, lymphomas except Hodgkin's disease, multiple myeloma, cancers of the plasma cell. Pretty much what this thing says is that exposure to radioactive contamination can pick which part of your system is weak. That's where you'll get cancer. Wow, these veterans don't have to prove a connection between these diseases and their services to be eligible for the disability compensation. That is actually outrageous. Other diseases associated with radiation exposure. VA recognizes the following diseases are possibly caused by exposure to ionizing radiation during service. All cancers, non-malignant thyroid nodular disease, parathyroid adenoma, posterior subcapsular cataracts, tumors of the brain and the central nervous system. 500,000 veterans, folks. They exposed 500,000 veterans. I personally had no idea. I was blown off my seat when I read that. I could not believe it. I don't know why, but in the back of my head, I thought that maybe they had just exposed, I don't know, not that many. I mean, I actually thought that maybe they were like maybe 10,000 veterans or 50,000, but 500,000, 500,000 of our soldiers were exposed to radioactive contamination and no money for advertising. The NAAV has been piercing through the numbers of potential claimants, gaining access to nuclear test records and documents needed for the filing of claims. So you have to have access to the test records and the documents. It is a private database with the written accounts of health problems involving 2,800 atomic veterans, many of whom are now deceased. With no advertising budget or marquee advocate, NAAV has no organized campaign to get the word out. 2 years ago, this was 2011, so in 2009, the Veterans of Foreign Wars published some information about NAAV, and Ritter got more than 10,000 inquiries. There has been some media coverage, such as the features on the search for atomic veterans by the Australian television of 60 Minutes. I don't know about you, but finding out that 557 veterans, that's a lot of veterans. You know, I had this idea because it was Memorial Day to just look up the atomic veterans. Because the theme of our show is talking about the bad guys, as Dave Parrish from Operation Save the Earth says. And I recommend everybody go to his site, especially any kind of newbie Fuku fighters. You know, any of us that are really like, we go to his website. I haven't joined his newsletter because I tend to ignore my emails. But I do watch his YouTube upload every single week, which is on Dave Parrish, Parrish, and it's Operation Save the Earth. You can just Google it. But you know, this is so beyond comprehension that we are dealing with a government that literally talks out of both sides of its mouth on purpose. That's the shocker. Like, it's Veterans Day and there's 500,000. They had no money at all. And very few are collecting damages. In the last 3 years, NAAV helped 50 widows. That was 2011. But only a dozen have been successful with their applications because it's difficult to prove their case. Huh. So that's the thing. You have to have the paperwork, and nobody told them that there was paperwork. So you come into this backwards, and you're old, you've lost your paperwork. You're like, yeah. The VA has granted at least 1,964 claims to date for monthly disability payments. The VA did not start tracking them electronically until 2006. Wow. The government reports only 1,641 claims have been approved for a one-time payment of up to $75,000 since 1992. 92% are for veterans. The others are for civilians working at the sites. 1,641 claims, and then they've claimed the disability payments. So maybe 3,500 people out of 500,000. A lot more could have applied, said Paul Blake, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, which has the records of the military personnel at every site and can verify the atomic veterans' presence at the deadly test. Ritter underscores the urgency of finding these aging veterans. Wow. So they're using the tactics of the Exxon Valdez, right? You just let people die before you tell them. Welcome to America. This was 2011. So the fact that Trump is president is, not that far off. I heard an economic guy on television yesterday saying, he doesn't like Trump personally, but he likes the economics he's bringing to our country, that the economy is booming. The kind of booming economy that they're creating is an insular booming economy where very, very few people do really well, and the rest of everybody, their economic status goes down. And when this gets realized, people are going to be so angry. But the question is, will we even have any type of a government? I'm going to have a guest on tomorrow who's he probably has some pretty radical ideas, I'm sure, for most people, but one of the things we'll bring up is the status of the government, because while Trump's right that there is a, quote, deep state, he's part of it. What a clever man to just expose it and act like he's not part of it. I mean, I'm actually really... I have to say, I have had a come to Jesus moment, having had this exercise of doing this radio show. several times a week since 2014 is when I started. So it's been a while. And every week I have had new things and new ideas, and it's made me realize that we really are guinea pigs. We are lab rats. We really are their little experimentations. Here's a story from May 27th, 2016, so 2 years almost to the day. America's atomic veterans. We were used as guinea pigs, every one of us, and I am going to read this. It's 8:25, and I want to thank Jules from our radio station. She's our producer in The Rock. She does overextend herself, and I encourage her to really take care of her health because she puts out a lot. So I want to thank Jules from UCY.TV, and I want to thank our listeners and the people at KEPW.org in Eugene, Oregon for carrying my show. And for caring enough to pay attention to talk about this, because I don't know how many people will be on television or on the radio talking about how atomic veterans say we were used as guinea pigs, every one of us, by Jennifer LaFleur, May 27, 2016. And this is revealnews.org. The USS De Haven hailed from Hawaii's Pearl Harbor on May 5, 1958, carrying 240 men deep into the Pacific on a secret mission. Gunner's mate Wayne Brooks only had a vague idea of their destination, but within a few days he would experience an explosion so immense and so bright that he could see his own bones. He and his crewmates had been assigned to witness Operation Hard Track 1, a series of nuclear tests in the Pacific. The De Haven, a destroyer, was one of dozens of ships assigned to the operation of the Eniwetok Atoll in the Bikini Atoll in the Johnston Island. It would be their crew's initiation into the ranks of hundreds of thousands of service members, now known as atomic veterans. We're talking 500,000 atomic veterans. We're not talking about a few veterans, 500,000, hundreds of thousands, 500,000. What seems like a story long tucked away in service books remains a very real struggle for those veterans still alive. The radiation cleanup crews who followed and their families, many of them sick and lacking not just the federal compensation, but also the recognition they believe they deserve. There is no commendation or medal for being an atomic vet. The magnitude of the De Haven's mission became clear even before the crew reached Eniwetok. As they reached an area near where tests already had been underway, they sailed into heavy showers. Radioactive rain poured down, and the hot seawater contaminated the ship's washdown system. The sailors were ordered to decontaminate the ship by scrubbing decks with long-handled brushes. Sounds like the USS Reagan, doesn't it? Then, as they closed in the Eniwetok in May 12th, Brooks spotted a far-off flash in the distance, a nuclear blast. The next morning, a countdown blared from the De Haven's PA system. A nuclear test, codenamed KOA, was being conducted from a barge in the lagoon of the Eniwetok Atoll. Its blast would release at least 75 times the power of the bomb that killed more than 130,000 people in Hiroshima, Japan in 1945. Hang on, let me get a drink of water. Sorry about that, folks. I got a parched throat. Brooks, a slender Texan, had enlisted in the Navy at a year earlier at 17. That morning, he manned his gun station on deck. He had no special goggles or clothing. He and the other sailors wore long-sleeve shirts and tucked their pant legs into their socks. They did as they had been told, turning away from the blast site, putting their hands over their eyes. The flash was so bright that even 20 miles from the blast, Brooks, now 75, said, "When you put your hands over your eyes, you saw your bones in your hands and in your fingers." Oh my God. Shockwaves crossed over the water. When the ship began to rock, Brooks uncovered his eyes and turned backward towards the blast site. He saw a mushroom cloud rising into the sky. The cloud just got bigger and bigger, he said. It was really colorful, red, orange. It seemed like a fire was burning inside of a cloud. 3 days later, Brooks witnessed another blast. The shot named Wahoo was detonated 500 feet underwater. It sent a column of water hundreds of feet into the air, a surge taller than the nearby empty target ships. The De Haven, only 3 miles from the explosion, shook violently with a loud cracking, and Brooks recalls rivets popping out of their metal moorings. His story is not unique. In the aftermath of World War II and during the height of the Cold War, between 1946 and 1962, the U.S. detonated more than 200 above-ground and undersea nuclear bombs. Over 3 months, Brooks would witness 27 of them, more than 10%. These rats. The atomic bomb blast that Brooks witnessed took place almost 13 years after Hiroshima. This week's visit by President Barack Obama to that city was undertaken in part because the president wanted to remind the world that the risk of nuclear destruction and proliferation still are very real, and he called for a sense of urgency around reducing the prospect of nuclear war in the future. Oh, so this is the hidden agenda because, we know that Trump is on an mission, right? Everything that Obama wanted to do, he wants to undo. So this is one of his nits to pick. That's why he's going over to see the crazy lunatic. And on a side note, in terms of the so-called North Korean summit, that's an excuse to start a nuclear war. Let's be clear. If the summit happens at all, which I think is a bunch of bloviating hot air, I think they're going to say, oh, we can't do it because Kim Jong-un insulted us and we have a right to go blast their nuclear site. We're going to take care of it, and they are going to kablooey it. Back to this story, because I think the people running the show are complete sociopaths and psychopaths. I think they have no regard for human life. Obviously, listen to this. In the decades since Brooks witnessed those 27 tests, he has suffered throat and lung problems, rashes, and prostate cancer. Like other atomic veterans, he blames his illness on radiation exposure. So far, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs seems to disagree. Brooks has applied multiple times to the special VA compensation reserved for atomic veterans. He was denied each time on the grounds that his pains and diseases are not among those that qualify. All cancers. Isn't that what we just read? All cancers. This was a common experience among the dozens of atomic veterans interviewed by the Reveal from the Center of Investigative Reporting. Many feel as Brooks does, abused, neglected, and forgotten by the government and a country that exposed them to unforeseen risks. We were used as guinea pigs, every one of us, Brooks said. They didn't tell us what it was going to do to us. They didn't tell us that we were going to have problems later on in life with cancers and multiple cancers. The estimated number of service members who participated in the test varies from source to source, but could be as high as 400,000. Brooks is among the fortunate. Even with his health challenges, he still is alive. That's one of the things they say. Well, you get to live. You just have problems. No big deal. One of the few studies of atomic veterans looked at I'm going to start that sentence again. One of the few studies of atomic veterans looked at about 3,000 participants. In a 1957 study, test shot code named Smokey. Okay, let me read that odd sentence again, but I think I know what she meant. One of the few studies of atomic veterans looked at about 3,000 participants in a 1957 Nevada test shot code named Smokey. Released in 1979 by the Center for Disease Control, it found that they had more than twice the rate of leukemia than their peers, 8 cases versus 3.5. Other studies have been inconclusive because they got paid enough money to make it inconclusive. The atomic testing program included a wide range of experiments and exposures. Thousands of service members were on ships in the Pacific. Thousands more stood and crouched in trenches carved into the Nevada desert. Pilots and their crews flew planes into mushroom clouds. Others were underwater in the ocean as blasts were detonated, swimming as frogmen or in submarines. Some parachuted into blast sites soon after the explosion. Oh my God. Wow, those guys are dead. The military had a long history of using war games to train troops. During the nuclear testing era, troops were exposed to detonations to see how they would react to a nuclear attack and whether equipment still would function. All of the atomic veterans were sworn to secrecy. Again, that is the thing. That's the worst part. Until the secrecy was lifted decades later, they could not tell anyone about their experiences. Even if they became ill, they could not tell doctors they might have been exposed to radiation. And so now the government's using that same doctor's report to deny their freaking medical benefits. Scientists had known from the earliest days of building the atomic bomb that radiation posed risks. Research found increased rates of certain cancers among the survivors of the Japanese bombings. It also showed that children of survivors are more likely to have smaller heads and physical disabilities. Smaller heads, you mean microencephaly and smaller heads. But there never was a coordinated attempt to study or track the health effects of radiation on atomic veterans or their children. They never used the knowledge that they could have gotten from us, Brooks said. They could have watched us all our lives and seen what it did, and they didn't. They dropped us like a hot potato. Brooks is a gentleman who ties back his long gray hair in a ponytail. He still speaks with the Texas accent, but now lives outside Portland, Oregon. He belongs to the National Association of Atomic Veterans, a group trying to help others get compensation and push for recognition. He also coordinates quarterly meetings of local atomic veterans at an American Legion Hall where they share experiences and support one another. The meeting started in the mid-1990s with about 50 members. 8 men attended the meeting in January. I think this is all we have left, Brooks said at the time. Jim Blunting was not at that January meeting. He died in December at 76 after a series of health problems. But he attended a barbecue in July, where the men and their wives gathered around the picnic bench behind an American Legion Hall near Portland. A thin man with sharp blue eyes and a trim mustache, Bunting got around with the aid of a cane. He wore a blue jacket covered with military patches, including one from the National Association of Atomic Veterans. Bunting became an atomic veteran when he witnessed the largest above-ground nuclear explosion on Nevada soil, Shot Hood, a 74-kiloton blast in the Nevada desert. More than 3,000 personnel were there, 2/3 of them Marines. Like Bunting, then 18, many were on temporary assignment from Camp Pendleton near San Diego. Wow. Before dawn on July 5, 1957, Bunting and his fellow Marines clambered down the trenches. He remembered that day vividly. He said that he crouched in a trench 3,500 yards from the detonation site. 3,500 yards from the detonation site. He was given dark glasses to wear. As nearly every atomic vet was told to do before the blast, he put his arms over his eyes. When the fat flash came, he saw the bones in his arms. The detonation ignited brush fires, and the shock caused some trenches to collapse. It shattered windows and shook buildings in mining communities at least 60 miles north of the test area. People in Los Angeles could feel the ground shake from the blast, according to the government documents, and San Franciscans could see the flash. After the blast, Bunting and other Marines were ordered out of the trenches. They participated in a coordinated air-ground maneuver against the attack objective, according to Defense Nuclear Agency report about Shot Hood. We played ward games right up to Ground Zero, where the sand had melted into glass, Bunting said. I could feel the crunching beneath our feet. Anyway, that was about the size of it. It was a hell of a firecracker, we thought. Hell of a firecracker. The health problems came later. I've had a heart attack, 3 strokes, an aneurysm, abdominal aneurysm operation, which went to my feet later on, Bunting said at the barbecue. I couldn't walk for 2 years. Bunting did not apply for atomic veteran compensation because he knew his conditions were not eligible, even though studies have linked radiation exposure to heart attacks and strokes. He wanted atomic veterans to get recognition. He died of congestive heart failure on December 16th without seeing that happen. Illnesses strike family members. Navy veteran Lincoln Gahalfs, G-A-H-L-F-S, 93, was one of the first atomic veterans. He lived long enough that he is now one of the oldest. He is sharp and commanding. After retiring from a long career teaching college sociology, he went back to school to earn his PhD. For his dissertation, he researched what happened to atomic veterans and later published his findings in a book, Voices from Ground Zero. Of the 376 atomic veterans Gulf surveyed, nearly half had health problems they attributed to their participation in the tests. About 1 in 5 said family members had health problems they thought might be related too. Gaff thinks the government lied to atomic vets and ignored their concerns. During the test, he and his shipmates called themselves the Royal Order of Guinea Pigs. At least they knew even then. He enlisted in the Navy in 1942, 2 months shy of his 20th birthday. When World War II ended 3 years later, Gaff was the lead quartermaster on a seagoing tugboat. He was stationed in San Francisco when the Navy asked for volunteers to participate in an atomic test. The commanding officer said a guy would have to be crazy to volunteer for that service. 2 volunteers stepped up, so Grafs and others were ordered to the Marshall Islands. He was assigned to the Operation Crossroads, a series of tests around the Bikini Atoll. He was the helmsman steering a 146-foot wooden-hulled tugboat toward an atomic blast code named Able. The bomb exploded on the morning of July 1st, 1946, about 10 miles away. He and his crew were told when the countdown started to put their arms over their eyes. He had no special glasses. Wow. Grafs still had his arms over his eyes when the pressure wave hit. It's hard to describe. It's really like something slamming into you, he said. When I felt the pressure wave, I took my arm down and started looking. Already there was a mushroom cloud, beautiful peach-colored, and that was it. But that was not the end of it. Within a few hours, Graf's tugboats and others were ordered into a highly radioactive lagoon where the bomb had been detonated. Empty ships placed varying distances from the blast to test their resilience were ablaze. He and his crews helped put a fire out on the USS Independence. 2 more tests were scheduled for Operation Crossroads, but only one of those shots, Baker, was conducted. Radioactive water contaminated nearby ships. A 3rd shot, Charlie, was canceled when the Navy could not decontaminate them. You stupids. Grafs remembered the Baker shot, several 100-foot column water, up in the air, with literally ships standing on end. It was mind-bending. He knows that he was fortunate to be alive despite health problems that include several bouts with skin cancer and prostate cancers over the years. Graffs gets about $650 a month in compensation for skin cancer. He applied for compensation in August 2012, but it took nearly 2 years for the money to show up. His bigger concern is what his exposure might have done to his children and grandchildren. Graff's daughter suffered from endocrine problems throughout her teenage years and died of a malignant brain tumor in 1996 at 46. One son has bipolar disorder. Another has Addison's disease, a rare adrenal condition. His granddaughter was born with a deformed foot. That's a pretty plate full for somebody who never had any history of any of these things in my family, Graff said. Why, he asked, has the government never studied what radiation exposure may have done to families? He works with the National Association of Atomic Veterans, often taking calls from other veterans trying to get help for themselves and others. When my daughter was dying, I was simply told that when my daughter was dying, I simply told her that I will not stop fighting for justice for these veterans until I die. And I've kept my promise so far. The children and grandchildren of other atomic vets have reported immune disorders, cancers, and reproductive problems. Veterans and their families have pushed for federally funded study of generational effects of testing era. Leading the charge was Pat Browdy, the widow of atomic veteran Charles Browdy, who died of lymphatic cancer in 1977 at the age of 56. We have a lot of kids that are terribly affected by their father's exposure to radiation, Browdy told the Federal Advisory Committee in 1995. I've testified in 15 congressional hearings on this issue. Congress eventually called for a feasibility test to see whether a study of families of atomic veterans could be done. Researchers concluded in 1995 that it would be too difficult to find subjects and connect them to their parents' exposure levels because there's only 500,000 atomic veterans to test, and Congress says it's just way too difficult. These liars, these people are beyond... I'm going to finish the story. Early days of nuclear testing. The U.S. nuclear weapons testing program began July 16, 1945, part of the Manhattan Project that led up to the bombs being dropped on 2 Japanese cities less than a month later. That is nothing compared to what they did to our people. 500,000 people and their families were bombed. Codenamed Trinity, the blast went off at Alamogordo bombing and the gunnery range in New Mexico. Many credited the 2 bombings dropped on Japan for ending World War II. That's a lie. And the U.S. military's subsequent atomic bomb testing for preventing World War III. That's also a lie. You know who credited that? The war profiteers. We designed and developed nuclear weapons as a deterrent, said John Hopkins, former associate of the nuclear weapons program at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, who retired in 1993. Evil John Hopkins. Our idea was that if we did our job well, it would be a credible deterrent to our opponents. In that sense, if we did our job well, they would never be used. Oh, that is exactly what my political science teacher told me. Nuclear weapons keeps us safe. They're still sticking with the lie. Even before the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, scientists knew the dangers of the weapons. From the earliest days of Los Alamos, they were aware of the dangers of radioactivity, said Hopkins. Those dangers became very clear after the bombings decimated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. People were blistered and scarred, said Austin Sogtad, a naval veteran who was in Hiroshima 2 weeks after the bombing was dropped. It was a horrible mess. Everything was gone. Sogtad, now 91, was assigned to deliver mail to troops in Japanese cities after the bombing. After a few weeks there, his hair fell out and he started having convulsions. He said he was hospitalized for 30 days. He said he never was told that he had radiation poisoning. He applied for disability compensation after he got out of the Navy, but was told that he would have to prove that he was exposed to radiation. He went to Hiroshima. He would have to prove he was exposed to radiation. Can you believe that? Even after contacting members of Congress and state legislators, Sogstad had not been able to get copies of the records that showed he was in Japan. Soon after the war ended, the U.S. ramped up its nuclear testing program, flexing its strength before the Soviet Union. The first post-war test was Operation Crossroads at Bikini Atoll in 1946. Testing continued, returning to U.S. soil in Nevada in 1951. Blasts were designed to study what a nuclear weapon would do to a wide range of subjects: humans, buildings, animals, even fabrics. Operation Q, a 1955 Nevada test, was designed to study home construction, food, and clothing. Mannequin families were stationed in houses made up of various materials to see how they would hold up in the blast. Several tests included animals: sheep, monkey, pigs, goats, horses, actual guinea pigs, to see how they would be affected by the blast. They did not fare well, remembers Walter Kennedy, who was an Army sergeant based out of Fort Lewis, Washington. Kennedy was assigned to put animals into trenches before the Nevada tests. After the blast, he drove a front loader dumping dirt over their charred carcasses. I didn't like it, he said, but it was my orders to do it, and I did it because when you get an order, you do it whether you like it or not. Kennedy, now 84, participated in 5 atomic tests. He has no idea why the animals were exposed, he said, but he knows what happened to them. Oh, they died. They never got out of the holes, he said. When I came in the next day and covered them up, those animals are still buried right where they were buried when I first put them in the ground. In other tests, monkeys and mice were flown into detonation clouds in unmanned planes to test the effects of radiation on them. Hold on, folks. I want to see how long this article is. I'm feeling anxious. We have 8 minutes left. Ooh, I don't think I'll be able to read this whole thing, but I am going to pick this article back up. I will do what Jules does and remember it. I will bookmark it because this is a story of testing that we need to hear. Concerns about radiation grew more widespread as tests continued. Top scientists, including Nobel Prize winner Linus Pauling, began to speak out against the tests. In 1959, tests found elevated radiation deposits in wheat and milk produced in northern United States. Politicians began to push on atomic atmospheric testing. In 1963, the Partial Test Ban Treaty signed by the United States, United Kingdom, and Soviet Union stopped all but underground nuclear testing. Yesterday, a shaft of light cut into the darkness, President John F. Kennedy told the nation on a televised speech. Negotiations were concluded in Moscow on a treaty to ban all nuclear tests in the atmosphere, in outer space, and underwater. But testing continued underground. The U.S. conducted more than 800 such tests after 1963. Today, the Nevada site, a 1,300 square mile secure area about 65 miles northwest of Las Vegas, is pocked by craters created when ceilings of the underground explosions chamber collapsed. The largest is nearly a quarter of a mile across and 320 feet deep. It was not until 1996 that all testing by detonation, even underground, was banned. Today, the United States Department of Energy tests weapons using complex computer simulations. It also evaluates nuclear weapons by studying the impact of shooting high-speed projectiles at tiny plutonium targets. And I venture to say that they are looking at what happens with the depleted uranium weapons that they are using everywhere. We have about 5 minutes left. I'm going to stop. There's a new subtitle here, Health Problems Appear. And I will stop there because this story deserves to be really understood. Do you guys get the message here? I read an entire book on my YouTube channel, John Goffman's book. In fact, I read 2 of his books, Poison Power and Population Control Through Nuclear Pollution. I actually thought that title of that book, Population Control Through Nuclear Pollution, was a joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was actually him freaking out because the United States government was forging ahead and refusing, literally has to this day absolutely refused to admit that radioactivity causes health problems. And when they do it begrudgingly. They already know, they have known. You know why they don't test? They don't conduct any studies? Because they did study after study. That's what Dr. John Goffman, Arthur Tamplin, Linus Pauling, they all worked together. They were all commissioned. I seriously encourage everyone to get a copy of this old book. It's called Poison Power by John Goffman and Arthur Tamplin. And it was the case against nuclear power plants before and after 3 Mile Island. And it is... what they talk about is the fact that every single one of the tests they did shows that radioactivity is harmful to life. That this is a technology that needs not to be used widespread. It needs to be scientifically studied and used until we understand it. That was their recommendations, because there is no level to safe radioactivity, and the methods that we have of generating it are antiquated. We have to poison our water to get what we need out to make it work. For the energy. We have to use so much water. We have destroyed the Hanford Reservation and the Northwest. The Columbia River will never, ever be the same. It is one of the most toxic sites on the world. Fukushima had a nuclear meltdown. The forests are completely contaminated. That will not ever get remediated. Hundreds of thousands of years is going to have to pass before it turns back to its state. It's going to be long under the ocean. So we have some serious issues going on here, man. I know this is kind of grim at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I love it that people on the West Coast who are hearing me live are willing to listen to this, because I make an effort not to be too grim about it, because for me, it's freedom. For me, this is a way forward. This is a way for us to embrace our future, because this is our future. And what we have to do is stop pretending like our government is going to tell us the truth. The people that have the power of these nuclear weapons, they don't want to tell us the truth, and they're not interested in helping us stay safe and healthy. So the question is, what do we do for ourselves? Well, we eat a good, clean, healthy diet. You exercise. Like I say, happiness is resistance, because they want us miserable, because miserable people are easy to control. So we just have to shake it off. And I'm telling you, I agree. Every day we have to shake it off. It is an exercise in well-being, because times are grim. We cannot change it. We have a traitor sitting in the White House. Our democracy has been slowly crumbling for the last God knows how long, if we ever had one. It goes up and down, our rights. But the idea of a democracy is something that we want to hold firm to. It's the secrecy of the Manhattan Project that has gotten us way off track in terms of having a free and open society. You can't have a free and open society when everybody's sworn to secrecy, when there's a bunch of people telling secrets, stabbing each other in the back, or withholding information, or all these secret plans. So for that, I say put your courage feet on, take some action, go for a walk, love your family, hold a baby, tell someone that you love them. Take action. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.